Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to your course Teaching of English as a Foreign Language, and this semester we are talking about TOEFL at advanced level, right? That's why we call it TOEFL 2. Got my point? Yes. So dear students, today it's very important lecture. Why it is important? I'm sure you all know it. Because today, we are going to start lecture number 16, which means we have completed first 15 lectures. Completing 15 lecture means that we have completed half the mark. I hope you understand. Yes. So today, in fact, we are going to start lecture number 16, and of course, from today onwards, we will be talking about more important lectures. It doesn't mean that the lectures that we had before this were not important. Yes, they were equally important. And particularly these 4 or 5 lectures, starting from today's lecture until, of course, lecture number 20, we'll be talking about micro-teaching. Have you seen the slide? Micro-teaching. What is micro-teaching? And you see, why do we need micro-teaching, and how can we be good micro teachers? Of course, we'll be talking about in these lectures. Clear? So let's start our today's lecture. As per routine, we have to review the previous lecture. That was lecture number 15. So what did we talk about in that lecture? So I see some of you are down today. Why is it so? Why are you upset? Why are you off the color? Some of you, not all of you. So you need to be active in the class, right? Of course, when you are a student of TOEFL, you need to be active. And when you are a teacher of TOEFL, you need to be active, right? So it's a two-way process, that the teacher should be active. Obviously, students would be active. So I feel some of the faces, are down. Maybe it's weather effect. Yes, it happens. Maybe you are a bit tired because you had 15 lectures, of course, and you have taken your midterm as well, right? Okay, it happens. It is quite natural that once you start a course, you show your energy, you show your enthusiasm. Once the course proceeds, after some times, what happens, that the students, in fact, they get tired, and at times they lose interest in that course. So this is not the requirement for this course. You need to be active throughout the course. You need to participate in the class. You need to respond. You need to come prepared for the class. And that would definitely help you, because once you come for the next lecture, I always talk about this, that before lecture reading is a must. When you come for a lecture, of course, after reading that topic, or in other words, we can call it a pre-lecture reading. So that really helps in the lecture. And again, once you read that topic after the lecture, so what do we call it? Post-lecture reading. So again, that really helps you. So pre-lecture reading and the post-lecture reading, and of course, when the lecture goes on, when lecture is on air, so you people can easily grasp them. You people can easily understand things. So this is very important, right? Pre-lecture and the post-lecture reading. And you know that reading is a must. Reading, in fact, why reading is important? Because in reading you open your vision. In fact, reading broadens your vision, right? Reading gives you ideas. So if you do all that, things would be in your favor. So that's why I always advise you people to read before the lecture, and then also read after the lecture. Clear? You understand? All right. So I ask you a question. What did we talk about in the last lecture? Yes, we talked about effective use of visuals, right? So when you see the word visuals, mean view. Is that clear? So what you view, right? And being teacher, being student of TEFL, we have to use various visuals in our lesson plans, right? In our micro teaching as well, we will be using various visuals. So we had lectures, of course, on these effective use of visuals, that things that you use as realia, as aids in teaching, or the teaching aids. You being teacher, we need to know how to use these visual aids efficiently and how to use these visual aids effectively, right? So we saw that what we do, we choose the most appropriate visual aid for your purpose and context, right? So that's why, of course, choosing a visual is a must, right? And while choosing the visual, you need to know what is the purpose. Why am I using this picture? Why am I using this word chart, right? And what is my context? What is the situation? Clear? So that's why when you choose visuals, you need to understand, you need to ask this question to yourself, that you see, why I have selected this visual for my teaching, for my lesson plan, and what is the purpose and what is the situation. So all these things, my dear students, you have to keep in mind. And then we discuss the use of black or the white board effectively, how to use. Even it's very important, being teacher, that some teachers, of course, they have been teaching for ages, but still when they write on the board, they do not know how to use the board. So that's why in this course we also help our students how to use the board. And we discussed that when you are using the board, you have to see where to write. Writing on the corner, writing in the middle, writing at the top, writing at the bottom, right? Even you are writing on a blackboard or you are writing on a whiteboard, you need to know, you need to understand where should I write. And again, when you talk about the use of board, my dear students, we discussed that the font of writing is equally important, right? Your writing must be legible. When you write legibly, and second thing is that in appropriate font size. Make the most of the overhead projector. If you are using OHP, then transparencies that you have it done, yes, there should be, well done, in fact, well prepared transparencies, and even the script on that transparencies should be legible, should have appropriate font size. And then, of course, we discuss the advantages and disadvantages of other media, in fact, right? We saw that, of course, when we use blackboard, when we use whiteboard, when we use OHP, when we use other things, what are the pros and cons? What are the advantages and disadvantages, right? These things, of course, we have to keep in mind when we talk about. And then we saw the podcast, of course. We see there are series of the program, the software that we can use in our teaching, of course. And then, of course, I gave you a definition. What is a podcast? Is a digital medium, of course, consisting of an episodic series of audio, video, PDF, or other files, right? So this is what we talked about in our last lecture. That is how to use visuals. So moving on to today's lecture, micro teaching. So before micro teaching, we should know what is teaching. Very simple question, that if somebody asks you what is teaching, so you might say, well, teaching is to communicating information. You might say teaching is to share some concept that you know or you have read from different sources. Now it's a time, because you are a teacher, you are somebody who has to teach, so from that teaching you become a teacher, right? Of course, the verb in English is teach, right? And then from teaching to, of course, the one who teaches, we call him a teacher. And that process is called teaching. So what is teaching? Is teaching simply communicating? Is teaching simply transferring ideas or the thoughts that you have learned or you have read being teacher? Right? So therefore, what is teaching is not merely imparting knowledge to students, not merely giving advice. Right? Teaching is not only that what you do, you impart knowledge. What you do, you transfer knowledge. It is not teaching. It is not merely teaching, in fact. To some extent you could say that, because this is what a teacher does. When a teacher, in fact, comes prepared in his class, he has his lesson plan in front of him, and then of course he starts his class. So of course what he does, that he imparts, he transfers knowledge to, of course, his students. Teaching is not passing information to the students, right? Again, I said earlier that teaching, of course, what people think that the teacher, it is the job of a teacher to in fact to pass on what information, right? Teaching is not sharing one's own experience. Is that clear? Teaching is not sharing one's own experience. Now what is teaching then? Right? So the point is, if I ask you in the light of these three instructions, you could say that teaching is where you impart knowledge, where you pass on your information, where also you share what? Your experience. Right? So sharing experience, imparting knowledge, and of course information is teaching. Is that clear? So it's a process in which a teacher, right, a teacher who has experience, who is educated, right, who knows how to communicate, who knows how to teach. So now what he does, he imparts. Now what does he impart, my dear students? He imparts his information, right? He also imparts his knowledge that he has gained from different sources. And also a good teacher adds a value to the information that you have. When I have researched, I have in fact visited different websites, so I got information. So it is not only that I pass on that information to you. What I do myself, of course, I think over it, right? I add value to it in the light of my experience, in the light of my teaching experience. What I do, that I pass on, in fact. I teach you people, right? So again, the teaching and training, again, teaching and mentoring is, you must have heard the word mentor, M-E-N-T-O-R, mentor, and mentoring, in fact. And you must have heard this training in the organizations. You get training, in fact. So training is for the job that you perform. For example, you are a teacher, so this TEFL is in fact a training. See, if you are doing it as a part of the course, because you are in the 4th semester now. After this, you might have to be in the teaching. So what you do, that yes, this would definitely help you, right? But if you do it as a separate course, so people do Masters in TEFL, so that of course is a professional degree, right? Having Masters in TEFL is a professional degree that you pursue. Fine. So over there, what you all, in fact, you discuss all the topics, all the related, in fact, areas that help you how to teach. Where you talk about modern grammatical theory, you talk about TEFL in class, you talk about ESP in class, right? So all these are the areas that you do, my dear students. So teaching, of course, in simple, teaching is what? Where you impart information, share experience, and of course your knowledge. Again, you see, if we move on, what is teaching? The best approach to understanding the nature of teaching is establishing a harmonious relationship between teacher, student, and subject. See, very important. Harmony. Harmony between what? Three entities. Which three entities? Of course, the student, very important. right? And then of course, who is the teacher, right? And then of course, mean the subject. So my dear students, I was talking about that how can we have this, of course, the best approach to understanding the nature of teaching is establishing a harmonious relationship between teacher, subject and student. Now, how can we have this harmony? It's a big question. It's a $1 million question. Having harmony between a teacher, student and the subject. Like, for example, now we are talking about TEFL. You see? So here means that how we can teach TEFL, how we can discuss this subject with the student, so that student would get more, fine, and the teacher of course tries his best to impart his knowledge in the best possible way to the students, right? So harmony is important. Harmony between teaching and of course the learning. The student learns, the teacher teaches. And again, what is the subject? It is history, it is geography, it is rhetoric, whatever the subject is. So this is what the teaching is. The best approach is to establish a harmonious relationship between these three important entities. Now, teaching is the activity of facilitating learning. Yeah, of course, it is the teacher who facilitates learner, right? And of course, how does he facilitate? This is important. Does he facilitate his learners through various activities? Does he facilitate his learners by providing handouts? Does he facilitate his learner by teaching in the best possible way? So this is what it happens, right? So what do? You facilitate. Effectiveness in teaching does not relate to teacher's age, sex and teaching experience. I mean, this is what a point is. It's a debatable point. That well, if you want to be a good teacher, you can be a good teacher even you are young. And I tell you that people who are good teachers, of course, if you see their past history, they have been good teachers, in fact. Since they started teaching, they were good teachers. And some of the teachers you might have seen, they are average teacher. I won't say they are bad teachers, but of course from the beginning, whatever the pace that they had, they kept on moving with it. Right? So this is the one thing that when you start with the pace, when in the beginning, if you show that you see you have something to do, or you have this urge for the teaching, or it is your first choice, and then you enjoy teaching, so it goes on. And sometime it happens that by force you have been put in the profession, you don't like that profession, so ultimately you cannot develop your likes for that profession, and you keep on struggling, and then you try to leave that profession. See, so this is what happens, right? And you see, the point is that age, sex, all right, and teaching experience. Of course, with the experience, you improve yourself. When you teach and you start teaching, of course, because experience is that you learn. With every mistake that you make, you learn from it, right? If you want to learn, you learn, right? And of course, some people, they are aged and they are not good teachers, in fact. Some who are young, but they are good teachers. So this is what the point is, that I mean, effectiveness in teaching does not relate to these factors, right? A young can be a good teacher, an old can be a bad teacher. A senior professor cannot be a good communicator. So one can become an effective teacher irrespective of his or age, sex and experience. Yeah, like I told you earlier, you can be good TEFL teacher, you can be good TEFL instructor if you have urge to be good, right? If you don't have, things would not be in your favor. So what are the defects in teaching? There are some important points. More teachers talk, right? Sometimes it happens that the teacher dominates in the class. You might say, I dominate. No, I don't dominate. I ask you questions, students. You reply me. See, I can read your faces. When I feel that you are a bit tired, I wake you up, and or you are drowsy, I ask you questions. Is that clear? See, so this is what, that when teachers talks more than the students do, so it can be a problem. Because that may be in fact a one-way communication, though there is no one-way communication, but it could be on that side. Right? So if teacher talks more than the students, it could be a problem. Most of the time in the classroom is devoted to teachers' talk, and students get very little opportunity to express themselves. Yes, it happens. And it's a problem with teaching, where students are not given time to express themselves. Like I told you, the harmony between the teacher, student and the subject. Right? So subject is, if you're teaching communication skills, of course that must be in mind. If you're teaching history, right? If you're teaching rhetoric, so again, the harmony. Right, students? You understand? So that's why the teacher talks more than the students, there could be a problem. Only memory level, in fact. Yes, another could be that during classroom interaction, teacher tends to promote mostly learning requiring memory level thinking, in fact. That, of course, what happens can be another defect in the teaching, that simply, of course, teacher wants to pour things in the mind of the students. That teacher wants them that they should get things in their memory, they should retain things in their memory. Well, students, so we're talking about what are the defects in teaching, and we talk about that first point. We talk about the teacher talks more in the class. So, I mean, how can we overcome this defect, my dear students? Yes, when we can maximize students' talking time. Clear? Okay. Now, third thing is more information and less explanation. Again, this can be a defect. Right? When the teacher just passes on information and he does not discuss things, or he does not explain things, it can be a problem. Right? That you give information but you don't explain. So, this can be a problem in teaching. So, once you will be teaching language, you will be teaching English as a foreign language, so try to focus more on explanation than on information. It doesn't mean that information is not important. Information is equally important, but the point is that you need to explain things, because once you explain, students can give their feedback, they can give their input, so things would be right in order. So most of the teachers spend more time in giving information and less on clarifying ideas, and still less time for giving explanations. This is the point. In fact, it happens, right? What happens that you see, of course, when you give more time to information and less time to explanation, so that may create problems in teaching. Less chance of encouragement. A very low percentage of teachers' time in the classroom is used for making encouraging student remarks, in fact. Or in other words, for encouraging students. It's very important, because once you encourage students, they feel motivated. Again, the warm-up stage. Right? So, students must be motivated. A motivated mind does well. A motivated mind absorbs more than a demotivated mind. Clear? So keep on encouraging students once you will be teaching, and particularly because you are going to be language teacher, so motivation, encouragement is a must in your lesson plans. You keep on encouraging. Once you encourage, you see, because maybe your one sentence can change the whole personality of a student. And that's why initially, of course, when we see that if student makes a mistake, we at times we ignore that mistake and we just, okay, fine, go on, goodbye, good. You see? So these words, in fact, give heart to the student. So he becomes hearty, and of course, these comments, my dear students, obviously help the learner to learn faster, right? So important. And then another problem could be that there is no planning, there's no lesson plan. Teachers are not systematic in planning and carrying out instruction. Again, this is very important. Why is it so? Because teachers do not go to the class prepared. They go to the class unprepared. And if you are not prepared, it's very simple that you would not be systematic. You can only be systematic if you come with a clear frame of mind in the class, if you have your lesson plan in front of you, so then you would proceed it well. And if you feel that, you see, you don't know what to teach, like generally it happens. When the teacher becomes experienced, you feel, no, it's my cup of tea, I can manage things well. But you see, I told you earlier that every good teacher, whenever he goes to his class, he has to have something, right? In writing, of course, if he brings something, if he brings his lesson plan, so he would be a successful teacher and he would enjoy that session, right? And on the other hand, if you go to your class offhand without having your planning, so class would be tough for you. Then you might see your wristwatch, or you might see your mobile these days, right? That's why these are some of the defects in teaching. Now, of course, what is defective teaching learning process? Can you see the image? What is it? If I ask you what is going on, the teacher, what does he do? He is hammering, right? So, defective teaching learning process. I mean, what is the defect here, by the way? If I ask you the question, right? That, of course, the student is being hammered, right? He is being, of course, what in this picture, if you see that what happens, that once you try to just, pass on information, right, without realizing that this either he is getting or not. So that can be, of course, mean defective teaching learning process. Now, what is learning? We talk about teaching, right? So we saw defects in teaching. Now, what are the defects in learning? But before that, what is learning, in fact? Change in behavior brought about by activity, training, or experience. This is what? Learning. When you learn something, you change. You change what? You change your behavior. And how that change come? You find through training or experience. Learning never ends. Remember, learning never ends. Anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. This is a very important question. That learning goes on, it never stops, right? There is no end to learning. That's why seek the knowledge from the cradle to the grave, right? So the point is, if you stop learning, you see, it means you would be nowhere, right? So learning is important. Learning goes on. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. Yes, learners stay young. Fine. Effective learning is based on what the learner already knows. Is that clear? Of course, effective learning, right, is based on what the learner already knows, in fact. Because definitely if you learn something and you can use that. Sometime you learn a thing, and when it comes to use of that concept, you cannot do that. So maybe the learning is faulty, right? So like nowadays, today we are talking about the micro teaching, and of course our lectures on micro teaching. And how did we start? Because first we saw what is teaching, in fact, right? And then we discuss what are defects of teaching, and then we move on to learning. And then, of course, we'll see defects in learning. So, in short, learning never stops, right? And anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 18. So, learning what? Knowledge acquired by study. Maybe you learn things. How do you learn? You read. What do you read? Read a case study, in fact. Learning happens and knowledge is generated in an environment where interaction between teachers, students and contents take place in an interactive ways. Interaction, very important part of our teaching, right? So when learning takes place, a big question, and the answer of course it is there, that when there is harmony, when there is interaction between the teacher and the students, and of course the content take place in an interactive ways. There is a famous saying, I hear, I forget. I see, I remember. I do, I understand. See? I do, I understand. See? What internship, for example. Maybe after this course, after your master's program, you might look for jobs, and maybe some institutes would hire you as internees. So over there, what would you do? You become an intern and you learn things, in fact. I hope you understand. Clear? So this is what mean I hear, I forget. I see, I remember. I do, I understand. So once you will be teaching, you will understand TOEFL more. Right? Nowadays you are a student. Fine? So I talk, I speak and you listen. Once you yourself will be teaching, you will know things more. You know, I told you that of course a teacher seeks more than the learner. Right? So that's why when you do, you learn more. So that's why learning, knowledge acquired by study, in fact. Now students, research around the world also suggests we remember 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear, and 90% of what we see, hear and do. It's important. Right? I hope you agree with this. That it's a research that says that 90%, of course, learning takes place when you see with your eyes, when you hear, ears, and once you do. Actions. Right? Seeing is believing, you know that. Fine? Then of course hearing. Once you see things, and then you hear, and finally you do. So 90%. When you simply hear, maybe 20%. Right? And then you see, maybe 30%. That's why visuals we talk about. That visuals have edge over hearing. Right? And then of course, if you combine these two, see and hear, maybe 50%. And if you add do to it, then of course 90%. Still we cannot say 100%. I hope you understand. So 90% of what we see, hear and do. That's why of course the micro teaching. Because in micro teaching what happens, we make our students to see things, right, to make plans, lesson plans, and to teach, I mean do. So 90% of course of learning is there when you see, when you hear and you do. Now there is of course, this is a graph, see, that shows you of course that 90% is when you see, hear and do. 20% once you hear. 30% once you hear and see, in fact. And if you combine these two, we have 50%. So here is what? 20%. Seeing what? 30%. Hear and see, 50%, yellow. And then hear, see and do, 90%. Now this of course mean in fact when you see this graph, it simply shows, right, that there is what? Division. See, that 90% learning takes place when you hear, you see and you do. See how important micro teaching is. Alright, so what happens in fact? In micro teaching what happens? Well students, so see there is a shift from what? Knowledge transmitter, primary source of information, content expert and source of all answers, mean the teacher. Now there is a paradigm shift from this to learning facilitator. So you facilitate learning. Then collaborator, coach, mentor, knowledge navigator and co-learner. Who is the teacher? Is that clear? So the old concept of teaching was simply that it is a process in which the teacher, of course, transmits knowledge. But now what we see, that of course we facilitate learning, right? Collaborator, coach, mentor, knowledge navigator, and co-learner. Then of course we see teachers control and directs all aspects of learning. From this we have a shift to teacher gives students more options and responsibilities for their own learning. Now see how the shift from the traditional learning, old learning, to of course the now present learning. Again, a shift from passive recipients of information. There was a time that students were very passive in the class, right? The teacher, of course, he had information, right? And he simply used to pass on that. Learners were not active, right? Of course, the control was with the teacher. So what his job was to communicate, to what? Transfer information. Okay. Then shift to active participant in learning process. Active participation in the learning process. This is what important. Then reproducing knowledge and producing and sharing knowledge, participating at times as experts. Another shift is of course learning as a solitary activity. Solitary, fixed. Learning collaboratively with others. So there is a shift now. How learning takes place now and how learning took place in the past. So there is a shift now. Shift from solitary activity to collaborative activity. So my dear students, of course, we call it micro teaching. This was just a background. So far, we talked about what is teaching. What are the defects in teaching? And then we saw what is learning, right? And how learning takes place. And then we saw how there is a shift from passive learning to active learning. Now if you see here, micro teaching. Dr. Allen and his group evolved micro teaching in 1963 in America. Right? Who is the person? Dr. Allen. And of course, his group members, they got this idea of micro teaching in which year? 1963, where in America. And you see this, of course. A teacher, what? He is teaching. And see the number of students here? How many students are there? They are 7 students, a small class in fact. And of course, right? So, in a small class, you see this image, teaching is going on. Now, of course, what is it? What does if you see the micro teaching, what does it mean? It's meaning the teaching of a small unit of content to the small group of students, maybe 6 to 10. In a small amount of time means micro teaching. Now, this is of course. Micro mean, you see, micro, the time is not more, right? So you have the time, and then group is small, and even a small unit of content to a small group of students. This is what micro teaching. I hope you understand, right? So teaching of a small unit of a content to a small group of students in small amount of time. Teaching. It's a skill training technique. I hope you understand. What is it? A skill training technique. It's a short session teaching, in fact. To train inexperienced students, teacher, for acquiring what? Teaching skills. Is that clear? What do? We train. We train inexperienced students, teacher, for acquiring teaching skills. To improve the skills of experienced teachers. If you are experienced teacher, this micro teaching improves skills. If you are inexperienced, if you are new to this profession, so we train. Right? Micro teaching trains you, in fact, trains inexperienced student teachers for acquiring teaching skills. So dear students, in fact, what the area that we talked about today, of course, is micro teaching, in fact. So here, the points that we talked about so far, that what is in fact micro teaching, right? Why we focus on micro teaching and why I have allocated 4 lectures on micro teaching. Because this is what the crux that you will have. And this skill that you will gain will help you in your interviews, will help you in your teaching learning process, right? Why, of course, why we focus on this one? Because in this micro teaching, you learn first of all how to make a lesson plan. Because when you are assigned a topic, what you do, right? You think of what to teach. Clear? Then you see what teaching aids would you be using for this purpose. Once you have decided the teaching aids, then you decide which language exponent to be taught. Is that clear? Right? So once you have decided all these things, then you go to the class. And of course, generally in micro teaching, you are given a small class, in fact. Clear? So small group is given and a small unit is to be taught. Clear? So again, in not more 5 to 7 minutes teaching. See the time factor, that you have to teach that content, that of course topic, in not more than 10 minutes. 1. Second, you have ideal strength. In language classes, generally we demand not more than 15 students. For ideal language learning classes, sometime you might have found classes of 30 students, 40 students, but ideally if you are teaching language to the students, so we don't expect more than 15 students there. Is that clear? So we require minimum strength there. In fact, an ideal class for this. The question is why we demand 15 students? Because language learning, right, it's a process that needs more concentration, that needs more practice, more presentation, fine? And all these things would be possible only if you have this. Your skills would be in fact enhanced and would be judged whatever you know if you have this in fact strength, if you have an ideal strength, and of course, and if you have a small unit of the content to teach, right? In this way you will definitely you will work well. Is that clear, students? Yes. So teaching is a very good, and of course definitely it's a holy profession, and teaching language particularly, my dear students, requires of course your communication power, your interpersonal skills, right, your interaction with the students, right? And micro teaching, of course, it has many advantages, right? One, it helps those who are new to this profession. And secondly, of course, those who are in this field, they have been teaching language for last 2 years, for 3 years. So again, to this teaching, in fact, what happens, that they improve, they hone their skills. Like, for example, you know that, of course, we have 4 stages, right? You have what? You have a warm-up stage, you have a presentation stage, you have a practice stage, you have a production stage. Clear? And then you may give homework. So these are the stages, of course, stages of teaching. When you teach language, so these are the stages of teaching a foreign language, right? So then we need to know that what to do in the warm-up stage, how to prepare the students for that learning process, right? And then we decide on what to give in the presentation stage, right? Fine. It's a very important stage, what you present, right? What to teach. And then, of course, you decide on how to teach, of course. Should we write on the board? Should we elicit information from the students, or you simply pass on information? Clear? So, of course, when you present something, you should think, of course. And once you have presented things, then you move on to the next phase. That is what? Practice. Right? Because the practice in a controlled environment, the teacher helps them, of course. And the students practice, of course. And that practice, of course, removes the shyness of the students. That practice helps students overcome their mistakes, in fact, and also their errors. Fine? And once they practice well, then you move on to the production stage. Then they produce well. Right? So all these three stages, they are interdependent. One stage depends on the other. Right? And for an ideal teaching, my dear students, you have to keep in mind that how one stage depends on the other, and how practice is important for production, how presentation is important for the practice. So in this way, of course, we move on. Got my point, right? So, but you must know, in fact, what is teaching, right? And what is learning. But you must not forget the context, that of course teaching a foreign language, in fact. Clear? Alright. Now let's summarize this lecture, short lecture today that we had, that teaching is not merely imparting knowledge to students, not merely giving advice. Again, it's a debatable thing. Right? Teaching is not that you just pass on information. Right? So if it is not passing on knowledge, for example, you might be thinking, what is teaching then? Right? So teaching is what? Transferring information. Fine. Teaching may be elevating the students, in fact. Teaching maybe, of course, when you teach consciously or unconsciously, you share your experience with the students. When you teach, what you do? You share experience, right? And that's why, of course, when you share experience, that experience, of course, the thought that you share with the students may be the outcome of your 10 years of life, right? So that's why, of course, the teaching is a great profession, of course. When the teacher comes in the class, he is not that, of course, a person who is there to teach you, for example, how to speak. So he brings his lifetime experience with him. Right? So, of course, when you are new to the teaching, so you have to put more efforts. Right? Because for that, you need to read more, of course. Because facing the class for the first time, again, it becomes a big challenge for some teachers. However, if they come prepared in the class, if they have a lesson plan with them, right? If they are mentally and physically prepared for the class, so things would be in their favor. They would enjoy teaching, and the learner would enjoy learning. In other words, I can say that teaching would be effective and learning would also be effective. Right? Why? Because both are prepared. The teacher is ready to teach and the learner is ready to learn. And of course, there is a harmony between the teacher and the taught. Clear? So, and then the subject they are teaching, again, is important. So what you teach and what the learner learns, again, is important. I hope you understand. So my dear students, of course, this is very important, that you need to keep in mind that what you teach and what learners learn. Teaching and learning, in fact, right? There are two phases. Right? So, when you come in the class, you first of all, you prepare yourself. Mental preparation, physical preparation for the class. And knowing the students, of course, like I told you earlier, the harmony between the content, the teacher, and the learner. Harmony is important. And to have that harmonious environment, the teacher, of course, should not be standing at one place and, of course, just dictating the students. He needs to facilitate the learning. What teacher does, he facilitates the learning, in fact. It is not that he passes on information. Because nowadays, you see, information is available. There are reservoirs of information. Internet is the best example, right? So, again, when the teacher comes, that he comes in the class to share his experience as well. Clear? To share his vision of life. So again, I mean, that is what the teaching is. Now, what is the best approach to teaching? What? That having this harmony. Harmony between what? Teaching. What? That is teaching, learning, and the content. To be taught or to be learned. I mean, this is a very important point that you must keep in mind. That how can we have this harmony? For example, if you are teaching present simple tense, right? If your lesson plan is on teaching present simple tense, so how do you create that harmony, that what you are going to teach and what the students would be learning? Right? So of course you see that once you would include that tense for that, I mean, it's used, that when and where we can use it. So once students would know the use of this, so you will find that now the teacher is successful, learners are of course taking interest, they would find it useful. Ultimately, you will create that harmony between the content, the teacher, and of course the student. So this is very important point that you must keep in mind. Teaching is the activity of facilitating learning. Is that clear? So what I mean, you facilitate learning. You are there to facilitate the learner. Learner is important. How can you facilitate the learner? Yes, once you know the learner's needs. What does he need, in fact? Need analysis of the learner is a must. How can we have this need and analysis? Again, it's a debatable thing. That when you interview the learner, right, or when you make your lesson plan, you assumed what does the learner already know, in fact. Or if you cannot know, in fact, the individual needs of every learner, what you can do is that you can keep in mind the common needs of the learners. So again, for this, what you need to do, you need to in fact work on different things. That what are the common needs, what are the collective needs of the learners, and you cater to those needs if you know it. And for that, mind you, that you have to explore, you have to find out that where do our learners struggle, what are their good strengths, what are their weaknesses. For example, if you compare Pakistani learners of English and Chinese learner of English, so you will find huge difference. Pakistani learners, they are quick learners of English language I'm talking about, and Chinese learners, they are slow. So are the Korean learners. Even amongst Koreans, if you see the North Koreans and the South Koreans, you will find the difference. Now, North Koreans are slow learners vis-a-vis South Korean learners. Again, why is it so? I mean, there is a background to it. South Korea is a democratic country. We have access to media, access to TV, access to internet, whereas the North Korea things are the other way around. Clear? So even if you talk about in Pakistan, of course, some people, they are very good and some take time. Clear? So that's why, my dear student, the teaching is an activity of facilitating learning. And I told you, how can we learn? Right? We learn by seeing. We learn by hearing. Right? And we learn by seeing, hearing, and doing. And which is the best? Right? So I told you that 90% learning takes place when you see, when you hear, and you do. Like if you simply hear, learning takes place, but it's of course maybe 20%. If you see and hear, maybe it's combine these two. When you in fact see, 30%. And 50% when you combine, when you see and hear, and 90% when you do as well. So when you start teaching, you learn more. Is that clear? So that's why, of course, my dear student, now you are in the 4th semester. If you get a chance to teach somewhere, start teaching. You see, it would be a great opportunity, and you will see once you start teaching, you will see that what are the problems that you can face while teaching, right? And then once you face these problems, you would try to address them. And then you would be a step ahead of those who would start looking for jobs after completing the degree. So I personally want my students to look for opportunities, right? You are in the 4th semester, you have done TEFL 1 in the last semester. Now you are, of course, eligible to teach language. We talked about 4 stages, we talked about lesson plans, and now you know how to make a lesson plan. Right? You know how to design activities, you know how to draft a lesson plan. And you see, the point is that knowing all these things are now easy for you. I hope you understand. Yes. So therefore, my dear students, yes, that get an opportunity, find an opportunity and start teaching language. And still, maybe of course, in your area there is no opportunity for teaching. What you can do, you can start a language center, language institute, spoken English for example. See, and you can start and see people would come and start teaching them. So of course, again, you learn more when you see, hear and do. Is that clear? So start it. It's important. Now, effectiveness in teaching, of course, does not relate with the age or the sex or the teaching experience. I hope you understand. So if you can be effective teacher, if you are committed. If you are not committed, then it may be difficult for you. Right? Age, of course, may not make a big difference. Similarly, gender cannot make a big difference. Experience cannot make that much difference. If you are willing to be a good teacher, you can. Things are open for you, in fact. So one can become an effective teacher irrespective of his age, sex or experience. Provided you have this commitment, your commitment level is high, you can be a good teacher. I hope you understand. So dear students, of course, in this lecture, we started talking of micro-teaching. Right? And what is micro-teaching? Of course, teaching what? At micro level. Why it is micro? Because we teach small unit, small chunk. Again, why it is micro? Because you teach small number of students. Again, why it is micro? Because you teach, in fact, what? See, students, of course, you teach only for 5 to 7 minutes. However, of course, your group may be more. If your group is more, then you can focus on only 5 to 10 students. I hope you understand. Why we need micro-teaching? Because if you are experienced, micro-teaching hones your skills. You come out, in fact, once you start teaching, you realize your problematic areas, your weak areas. And in the next lesson, of course, you try to overcome it. Right? Because every lesson, when you teach, when you make a lesson plan, you learn something from it. So my dear student, make up this year, develop a habit of making lesson plans. If you can. If you have, of course, if you want to, go on. It's really important. It's really important. So my dear students, of course, these are some points that you keep in mind when you are, of course, will be teaching language to your students, and we'll have more discussion on micro-teaching. If you have any question, you can ask. What is learning? Okay, good. I told you that learning is, of course, when you change your behavior. The activity, in fact, when you learn. Any other question? How can we learn? Okay, I showed you that graph, that learning takes place, maximum learning takes place once you see, once you hear, and once you do. Is that clear? How can we do it? Alright, of course, my dear students, that once you have the visual, when we talked about in the last lecture, that visuals are important, right? Visuals, in fact, they are pictures, fine? And once your learners view a picture, of course, they learn better. They learn better. Is there any other question? Significance of micro-teaching. Well, yes, micro-teaching, of course, is really important. Why it is important? Because through this, if you are new to teaching, you learn how to teach. If you are experienced, you improve your skills. So it has, of course, multi-purpose. It is useful for new teachers and useful for experienced teachers. So students, with this, it's a time to say goodbye. See you in the next lecture.